Studied in Swedenborg. Anyone heard of Swedenborg? So, I'll get right to it. Correspondences is between everything in the spiritual world and the natural world. So it's kind of a perfect integration of science and religion. Everything in the spiritual world is the first cause of everything that exists in this world. So whatever entity we're speaking of there has a correspondent here. And that spiritual core is the reason it exists. We're so consumed in the material world, we don't think of it that way, naturally, because we are material. But when we think in a spiritual way, we see that its essence and its original core is from a spiritual source. So correspondences exist on three levels. Everything in the Word, that means in the Bible, that is Holy Scripture, has an internal sense and an external sense, and it has a correspondence with heaven. Everything in the human form, our bodies, has correspondence with heaven and everything else, and everything in nature. So those three levels. I'm mostly going to talk about nature. I'm kind of an amateur follower of physics and can, understand the principles. I don't know the math at all. But the principles of nature correspond to spiritual principles. So that's what I'm going to talk about and present. So to understand just a sense of correspondences, pretend like you're hiking up a mountain. When you hike up a mountain, it's tough, it's rigorous, you got to persevere. And when you reach a certain elevation, there's just this universal feeling of pleasure at looking at a huge view. That's kind of the end result of a long hike. In a spiritual sense, that corresponds to an elevated perception. We go through trials, we go through struggles, and if we are present to them, we can end up in having an elevated view after the struggle. That's a sense of how a spiritual principle relates to a physical principle. So the core, the mother of all correspondences, has to do with the sun. So I'm going to present these ideas as simple way as possible. The physics guys will get it super easy. So we want to look at the science in the sun and then see how does that correspond to heaven. In this physical world, we see outside, or not, we don't see outside, but we know in the universe there's an infinite amount of suns. And the suns are the source of creating life. They create heat, they create light, and they produce all the minerals and elements of life within their core. So in science, the sun looks like a ball of fire, but it's a raging battle in that sun between the force of gravity crushing matter, the hydrogen atoms in the core are under such heat and pressure that nuclear fusion takes place. So that's what a sun is. So you've got a royal battle between nuclear fusion exploding outward and gravity pressing inward. So the sun is really a raging equilibrium. There's an equilibrium between those two forces, immense forces. So this principle, we're going to look now at how it relates to God. In the spiritual world, there is only one sun, and God, the Lord, is in the midst of that sun. In Him, there is infinite things and omnipotent power. So He has His divine essence, the soul, and he has his divine body. And between those two is a holy marriage. He is human, but he's a divine human. In the process of his life, he overcame all in the glorification process and made his physical body divine. That is a whole other subject, but it's an incredible process, a crucible, like in the middle of the sun. He overcame the laws of physics and made his human divine. And in the midst of this sun, radiates from him the holy fire that is the source of life. From a sun radiates what? Light and heat. From him, in the midst of the spiritual sun, relates love and wisdom, which corresponds to light and heat. Wisdom is light, heat is love. So our mind has to make this conception in a spiritual way. We think of love and wisdom as abstractions. I believe it's actually spiritual substance. So what does that mean? That means we all can have love, we can all have affection, and you can feel that affection. That is a spiritual presence. And all this comes from God. So that radiation from him is what sustains life. The further correspondence is that in the physical sun, at the moment of a supernova, or the sun exploding, iron is produced, but then all the other minerals in the universe are produced in that moment before the explosion, where it becomes its greatest point of crucible. So in giant supernovas, the higher elements are produced, like silver and gold, which are more rare. So that sun is, even the scientists say, the mother of life. It not only produces the heat and light, but it produces the elements that produce everything in life. It's the same thing with the Lord in the midst of the spiritual sun. All life is produced from him, and it radiates out and is distributed to the souls, of human beings, and to everything else: plants, life, all geology, space. So let us explore a little further on how you can work with these correspondences. It's an infinite subject, but I want to integrate especially with science and give you an example. Science discovered that the universe is expanding at the speed of light. They'd assumed, it's going to just slow down, like if you roll a marble, it slowly degrades, but it's not. It's expanding, boom, at the speed of light, eternally. Or they don't say eternally, but and not only that, but it expands from every point in space, not just from one center, from one Big Bang point. Every point in space is expanding. Okay? Now that was a mind blower. You would think it was from one point. But it's always a dynamic answer in these types of things. It's not just linear as we tend to think. So that's the physics of it. So there's two things we can talk about from that. In a spiritual sense, it tells the incredible value of every human soul. Every human soul is a sovereign center, just like every point in space is a sovereign center. And in the heavenly sense, heaven is not in any way stagnant. If we were to have a joy, but it suddenly hits a plateau and it stops there, then it gradually degrades and doesn't become joy. It has to be ever increasing. And it's the nature of heaven that it's ever increasing in its quality of joy, which is beyond our imagination to take, but in principle, it has to be that way for it to be perpetual joy in heaven. And the principle of that is that the more that enter heaven, the more complete it becomes. So that speaks to the use of every single individual ever born has something unique to contribute to life and to heaven. And it fits together in a way that becomes complete and perfect. Everyone has a use. Everyone there cares more about another person more than they do themselves. And therefore everyone is continually increasing in happiness because more and more people are continually coming in. So the other point we can extrapolate from this, now this is it's kind of an example, it's my own thoughts, the physicists here could discuss this, but we've talked about in science that there's an infinite largeness, right? You think of infinity, but this principle that the universe is expanding at the speed of light must be the definition of infinite largeness. There's no static point. It's completely dynamic and ever increasing. And it's also thought of what would be an infinite minuteness. So we talked about how everything that exists is in equilibrium, right? The sun is the source, and the Lord and the spiritual sun is the source. So everything that is created repeats the form of that which created it. So that's why everything that exists has to have an equilibrium in order to exist. If you look at anything, a leaf, you have pressure from the outside, light from the inside, or even an atom. It has its electrons and neutrons, and it orbits and it's in a state of equilibrium. It always changes, but then it goes back to equilibrium. So in that sense, everything that exists is repeating the form of the Creator. So we could conceptualize infinite minuteness, which is the equilibrium to infinite largeness, because it's impossible for our mind to conceive how could something be so small. Our mind can't just do it. But if it's expanding at the speed of light, then it's continually making more room for more substance eternally. So there can always be another infinite minute item. So this is a part of how the idea of correspondences work. It integrates everything between religion and nature. Everything that is in nature first results from its spiritual form, and that all follows from the sun. That's the mother example, and then everything else that exists. A tree. If we were able to look at the universe in its entirety, in its whole picture, which no human can do, but if somewhere elevated to that perception, I believe you'd see the whole universe is in the shape of a human form. Because we're made in His image. So we're human form because God's in the human form. And God is infinite, and in Him are infinite things. Does anyone have any questions about any of these things? Thoughts?
We will come to the questions.
We'll come to the questions later.
Go ahead, finish your thought.
Okay. All right, well, I hope that was able to follow that. The idea of correspondence is, it's part of the structure of the universe. Science does not really think of incorporating the spiritual, you know. It wants empirical facts, which is obviously good. It needs to do that. But the answer is going to be continually out of reach until you incorporate the spiritual. Like, it's a huge clue to science that the human form is a universal form. Like when they look at the cosmic web now, you ever seen pictures of the cosmic web? It's the mapping of the whole universe as science sees it now. And it looks exactly like the nervous system. The synapses in the brain and the nerves. So it's like we're getting a little piece of the picture, because, you know, it's infinite. We're only going to get so much. And we got that part of the picture. If you'll ever see the whole thing, we see the human form, which I think is incredibly affirming. With the Christian Science thing, I mean, we're healing from a spiritual level. Not that eliminates science as part of it, but so it's a affirming spiritual thought, I think, for all of us to take in. It doesn't mean there's some sort of privilege because we're human. It means we have a responsibility to take care of everything, as the human form being the highest form in the universe. So we talked about the love and wisdom coming from the Son. In our soul, we are receptacles of life from the Lord. I think that's an incredibly important thing to take in, because in our mind, in our ego, we think life comes from us. But we are literally receptacles of life from the Lord, which is this stance of humility. We don't have life without Him providing it. Even freedom is completely a gift from Him. So in spirituality, we are receivers. We receive. And the principle of that is, the more we allow ourselves to be led by the Lord, the more we become ourselves. The gifts in our soul come to life in use, and we express what, you know, God has given us. So I will wrap it up with that. Thank you very much. Hopefully we'll take questions later.
Thank you, Reverend Steve Sanchez. Give him a big hand, a big clap for our very first Science and Religion panel here. And you are being watched live on the Facebook right now. People are joining slowly. Please hold on to your questions. Make a note of who you will be asking the questions, which panelists. So don't forget to bring the question QA time later on. Okay? You want to come in, Ben? You want to jump in? All right. You want to turn my agenda upside down? You're welcome, sir. Come on in.
You want to sit there? Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
I'm an easygoing guy. I'm not going to hold you to the schedule. Go ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ben Venkatesh from Fiji Community.
Thank you.
Oh, I also want to forget, he is a two-time president of the Livermore Temple. What's the proper name for the Livermore Temple? Shiva Vishnu Temple. He is the only person who became two-time president there. Give him a big hand, please.
I'm going to talk about Hinduism a little bit, but it's more of an exploratory thing. And one aspect of Hinduism, what Chaplain Sanchez talked about, it pretty much relates to that. But Hinduism is an esoteric religion. It's pretty much involved with the mind science. That's one aspect of Hinduism. And it is more like whatever happens outside happens inside. So it's more of a microcosm and macrocosm. It all deals with the human mind. If I remember correctly, Hinduism was very heavily involved with cosmology. And cosmology and Hinduism were really heavy trying to find out the origination of the universe. And, but anyway, eventually the Hinduism did find the planets and the motion of the sun and the planets. Then they realized that they're very heavily involved in the sun movement and the planets, and it came out of the Hindu astrology. So right now there is about 80% reliance on astrology for any Hindu to do anything. If you go to, even for an interview, you have to look at your astrology if you go to an interview for jobs or for any prayer. And so there was a force behind that, but this was until Newton showed up. And I wrote this down and say here, Newton said that the most beautiful system of sun, planets could only proceed from the counsel and the domination of the intelligent. So that brings down to basically God to me. As somebody is doing the work, right? Mm-hmm. And Hinduism, then the scholars of the Hindu system, I wrote this down, so I want to read this out. Before 600 BC, Sanskrit scholars, Sanskrit is the Hindu language, the original language, known as Shulba Sutras, were written by a Hindu scholar providing prescription for building fire altars. In this, they contain the geometrical instructions of designing and constructing altars. The sutras are the knowledge base. Are rich in mathematical content like Pythagoras theorem, Pythagoras triplets, area preserving transformation, estimating, all kinds of mathematical stuff. It is evident that Hinduism believed in inherent mathematical order found in the nature like science does. So there is a connection with the religion and science as far as Hinduism is concerned. And I know that NASA has used many of the original Sanskrit concept of Veda information they turned into big bombs, right? The idea when we went to build a temple in Livermore, we were not given any space. So Livermore, city of Livermore invited us. So we went down there and said, we'll give you a space, you can make a temple for yourself. And so we went down the list of things. Oppenheimer was a scientist. And one of the bombs that he created was Shiva, who is the god of death. And Shiva is also a god of death in Hinduism. The triads, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesha, and Shiva is the third. So he said it might be a good idea if you use the name of the temple as a Shiva temple. He said, I no problem at all. We'll do that. So it became a Shiva Vishnu temple. So I see a lot of connection with the religion, with science, and I, in my opinion right now is that I'm pretty sure most of the scientists would not agree with me, but science comes from religion. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, well, thank you very much for that very short synopsis. Before I forget, when Reverend Steve was talking, he referred to the sun, and I want to share 2 points so that I can bring it up in my closing up. The Quran says this, Allahu ma fi samawati wa ma fil ard, that God, Allah, is the king of the heaven and the earth. There is a similar verse, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. He is the light of the heaven and the earth. I'll come to that later on. Thank you very much. With that, I want to invite Kamath with your perspective, please. Give him a big hand. Vasudeva Kamath from South India.
Hello. It's an honor for me to talk in presence of a distinguished guest today. I'm not a scholar, I am a Hindu, and from my life experience, whatever I know, I would like to talk, discuss with you. Let me ask you one thing. Can you tell what is this when we say
Namaste.
Namaste? What does that mean?
I see the God in you.
Very right. I respect the divinity in you, and the other person also says, I respect the divinity in you. So, Hinduism has a lot of concepts. So, one of the concepts is Punarjanma, that is rebirth. Are you able to hear me, or should I take this one? This one?
Go ahead.
Hello? Yeah, okay. So one of the concepts is rebirth. And this concept will help us for human unity and world peace. What it is, whatever we may look like, whatever our makeup, color, country of origin, or whatever faith we follow, irrespective of that, we are human beings. There is a soul inside all of us. It's like a small lamp burning inside all the time. The moment soul departs the body, the person is dead. So, irrespective of how we look, so this is the basic point we are all connected with. So there is that saying in Hinduism, Vasudevā Kutumbakam, means one big family of the Supreme Divine. Because of this, the soul is part of the Supreme Soul, and we take birth in different parts, places of the world without our choice. Now, after the death of a person, the soul leaves to its resting place. Of course, there are different stages of how the soul passes to the resting place. And then after some time of resting, it comes back again for another set of experiences in next life. And that could be in any part, any place, and to any parents. So in my previous life, I might have been somewhere in Africa or maybe Latin America. And like this, we all have taken many births so far. So if we are able to comprehend this concept, we are all connected. We are all, sometimes we might have been as parents, children, cousins, uncles, aunts to many of us. So, if you understand this, we are all one big family, irrespective of what we look, what is our background, and what is our religion and faith, what we follow. Now, to understand this, Hinduism has different texts, practices, ceremonies, rituals, and what they do. For example, yoga and meditation. So yoga means unity with the Supreme Consciousness. And of course, what we most of us know about yoga is some postures and some body exercises that we do. It is just only one aspect of yoga. Yoga is an integral approach to life of transformation from lower nature to higher nature, from lower consciousness to higher consciousness. And some thousands of years ago, one sage by name Patanjali systemized those yoga practices into some principles called sutras. They are called Patanjali Sutras. And where he says, eightfold path of yoga. There are 8 steps of yoga. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dhyana, Dharana, Samadhi. The 8 steps. So asana is one of those steps. Why the asanas are done? For the flexibility of the body, so that you will be able to sit in meditation for a longer duration of time. You will be able to reach to higher consciousness in silence only. There is no other way, which is the experience of great people all over the world. If you want to achieve higher consciousness, higher levels, it's possible only by silence. And to remain in silence, your body should be flexible. So yogasana is one aspect of that. Out of the 8 aspects, yama and niyama, that is the restraint and discipline. Yama is restraint, niyama is discipline. Those two itself, if people practice, they will help a lot for individual improvement, society improvement, nation and world improvement, and of course world peace. So I am given 10 minutes, I don't want to take more time. If any questions, I can answer later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vasudeva Kamath. And with that, I'm ready to invite somebody about whom I got chewed out by Mary for not introducing him properly. That's my spouse, Annie Koya, who always gets left out because she sits in the corner. She's going to do a readout for us, a synopsis that has been shared by Dr. Suhail Hussain. He's a medical doctor. He was supposed to be here today at my invitation, but he couldn't make it. Instead, he sent us a synopsis, which he uses, part of it. I mean, just took a small part of it. So Annie, in addition to wearing a number of hats here, cook and everything, she works for ERIN Medical Center, and she is now a very confirmed unionist. So beware of that. She is a ferocious union leader, and that ferocity can be felt at home too. Okay? So with that said, you with him? With him backing her? You totally agree with her? Talk to you later on, sir. Anyway, I asked Annie to read this out real quick and very distinctly, please. Thank you.
Hi, I am Annie. Chapter 21, verse 34. And he it is who created night and the day, and the sun and the moon, and guiding along in its orbit, self-explanatory. Chapter 57, verse 26. And we sent down the iron within the material for violent warfare and many benefits for mankind. Importance of iron as a resource, and as a key element of our body. Chapter 30, verse 42. Corruption has appeared in the land and the sea, and because of what man's hands have wronged. In reference to pollution, chapter 4, verse 120. And they will alter Allah's creation in the reference of genetic engineering. Chapter 16, verse 9. And he has created horses and mules and donkeys, and that you may ride them, and as a source of beauty. And he will create what you do not yet know, in reference in future forms of transportation used to confirm validity of Holy Quran, Chapter 55, verse 20 to 21. He has made the two bodies of water flow, and they will meet one day. Between them and now a barrier. They encroach not up one upon the other. And chapter 25 to 50, verse 54. And he it is who has caused the two to see the flow. His table and sweet, and the salt fish and butter, and between them he has placed the barrier and a great partition, in reference to creation of the zoo and Panama Canal can be used to confirm validity in the Holy Quran and how right as a book it is, and was 140 years ago.
That's it? Okay, well, thank you very much, and here's the handout. Thank you very much. With that, I'd like to invite now Eric Nelson, who wants to be recognized as Christian Science practitioner. So we have a pleasure. So come on in and do your presentation.
There you go. Is this on?
You want to take the other mic instead?
Is this on now? There we go.
Oh, beautiful.
Right. Dr. Koya told me I had 10 minutes, so normally I like speaking extemporaneously, but I did write out my remarks so I would stick to the 10 minutes, because I tend to go on and on. So read my remarks and we'll take questions later on. And again, I am as already introduced myself, as a Christian Science practitioner. In her book, Science and Health, with Heated Scriptures, Mary Baker Eddy, the discoverer and founder of Christian Science, makes a compelling statement. She writes, Jesus of Nazareth was the most scientific man that ever trod the globe. He plunged beneath the material surface of things and found the spiritual cause. For Eddy, this was not merely her opinion, but an undeniable truth, informed by her Christian faith, as well as her, in her words, practical and even scientific application of what the Bible, particularly the healings of Jesus, revealed to her of humanity's unfailing relationship to the divine, to God. Nevertheless, to this day, more than 150 years after her discovery, Eddy's pairing of the terms Christian and science continues to be met with everything from curiosity to confusion to derision and disdain. This is why I thought it might be helpful to explain a bit about the how and why of Eddy's pairing of these two words, and then share some of what it means for me personally to be a student of Christian Science. I'm going to start by reading a longer excerpt from Eddy's autobiography, Retrospection and Introspection, which describes how her discovery came about. She writes, "It was in Massachusetts in February 1866 that I discovered the science of divine metaphysical healing, which I afterwards named Christian Science. The discovery came to pass this way. During 20 years prior to my discovery, I had been trying to trace all physical effects to a mental cause. And in the latter part of 1866, I gained the scientific certainty that all causation was mind and every effect a mental phenomenon. And I'm going to take a quick time out here to mention that Eddie's use of the word mind in this context is not a reference to the human brain, but rather to that singular divine mind that she identifies as God. Getting back to her story, she continues, "My immediate recovery from the effects of an injury caused by an accident, an injury that neither medicine nor surgery could reach, was the falling apple that led me to the discovery of how to be well myself and how to make others so. Even the homeopathic physician who attended me and rejoiced in my recovery, I could not then explain the modus of my relief. I could only assure him that the divine spirit had wrought the miracle, a miracle which later I found to be in perfect scientific accord with divine law. I then withdrew from society about 3 years to ponder my mission, to search the scriptures, to find the science of mind that should take the things of God and show them to the creature and reveal the great curative principle, deity. The Bible was my textbook. It answered my questions as to how I was healed. But the scriptures had to me a new meaning, a new tongue. Their spiritual signification appeared, and I apprehended for the first time in their spiritual meaning Jesus' teaching and demonstration, and the principle and rule of spiritual science and metaphysical healing. In a word, Christian Science. 9 years after Eddie's accident, she published Science and Health, a book that would undergo many revisions before its final edition in 1910, the same year that Eddie died. This book is intended to be studied along with the Bible and includes the 3 basics of Christian Science theology, including the nature of God, which, in addition to divine mind, as I just mentioned, Eddie defines as divine principle, soul, spirit, life, truth, and love, is all-powerful, all-knowing, always present, and is both mother and father. It also includes the nature of man as the image and likeness or reflection of God or spirit, and the nature of evil, which Eddie describes as anything that would deny the allness of God or good, including sin, disease, and death, that is ultimately overcome with truth. The book also explains the manner in which healing happens, mental, physical, emotional, and otherwise, based on the many examples we're given throughout the Bible. Eddie writes, Jesus beheld in science the perfect man who appeared to him where sinning mortal man appears to mortals. In this perfect man, the Savior saw God's own likeness, and this correct view of man healed the sick. Thus, Jesus taught that the kingdom of God is intact, universal, and that man is pure and holy. Now, when people ask me why I'm a Christian Scientist, I usually mention 3 things. First and foremost, I love what Christian Science teaches me about God and my relationship to him, about God's unyielding love for his creation. Second, the sense of confidence it gives me, at times even a sense of fearlessness when confronting all sorts of challenges. And third, the many healings I've experienced over the years, healings that have included not only mental and physical improvement, but moral and spiritual regeneration as well. And I'll share just one of these healings since it's the most recent and, quite frankly, the easiest for me to recall. One afternoon, for no apparent reason, my knee became very swollen and very painful, making it difficult to walk and impossible to drive my stick shift car. During a moment of prayer, and it really was just a moment, what came to mind was the phrase, "no schism in the body." For most, that probably sounds like a pretty obscure thought. But for me, it felt more like a divine encouragement to go and find that passage in the Bible. It's very close, as it turns out, to where the Apostle Paul speaks about the metaphorical body of Christ. For the body is not one member, but many, writes Paul. If the foot shall say, because I am not the hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear shall say, because I am not the eye, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? If the whole body were an eye, where were the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where were the smelling? But now hath God set the members, every one of them, in the body, as it hath pleased him. As I read this, I realized that a group of office mates I was having difficulty working with were actually meant to work together, divinely ordained and empowered to carry out whatever task God, divine mind, had given us to do. Within a very short time, my knee was completely back to normal. No rest, no painkillers, just a small yet very potent dose of the Christ, a term that Mary Baker Eddy defines as that divine message from God speaking to men. That divine message from God to men speaking to the human consciousness. There was also noticeable improvement in my attitude toward my colleagues, a more Christly attitude, if you will, and shortly thereafter, an equally noticeable increase in our ability to work together. I might add that my reason for not seeking medical help for my knee wasn't because anyone told me that as a Christian Scientist that wasn't an option, as is often erroneously assumed, but because I've been healed so many times before solely through my reliance on prayer. A practice, at least for me, isn't so much about asking for God's love as it is learning to love, as was illustrated in the example that I just shared. In Science and Health, Eddy writes, Christian science differs from material science, but not on that account is it less scientific. On the contrary, Christian science is preeminently scientific, being based on truth, the principle of all science. Regardless of your religious or spiritual background, I would imagine that everyone here today has experienced in some way, shape, or form the kind of healing that I just described. A moment when you realize that your life is governed by something other than human circumstance or a physical body. A moment when you feel that much closer to the divine. We may use different words to describe this kind of experience, but it's something we can all be grateful for and expect to see more of throughout our lives. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand this over to my wife. And she's capturing me. I ought to close this up, then we'll open for discussion. And I wanted to, do you hear me loud and clear?
Yeah.
My very heavy baritone voice reaches out there. I'm going to make up one. Before I go on to doing that, let me share this with you. Muslims have two sources of information. One is the Quran, the Holy Quran, and the other one is called Hadith, okay, Arabic word, which are the traditions of Prophet Muhammad, recorded in various books. Prominently known ones are Sahih Muslims and Sahih Bukhari. These are quite a few there, about 4 to 7 books. But these are primary, very reliable books. These books contain narratives of the Prophet, including the prophecies that he was foretold or he told on the basis of revelation and on the basis of the Quranic interpretation. So these are two sources that I'm relying on, and having heard all this, and I must say, it's a delight to hear different perspectives. There's no wrong or right perspective, okay? But what happens here is that everybody is driven to a central source or a thinking. We broaden our thinking, we broaden our inquiry, we tend to understand, we're all attempting to understand God better. Am I right? So that's the primary objective here, I believe. And let me tell you this, in terms of the Holy Quran, there are more than 700 verses, all of which I'm going to read to you today. Okay? That's going to take like 2 weeks to do that. I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to I'll give you a handout later on. And from the Quran, I want to just read one verse only, which is, I hope the verse is mentioned here. However, let me read the English part of it, okay? Then we fashioned the sperm into a clot. Then we fashioned the clot into a shapeless lump. We fashioned bones out of this shapeless lump. Then we clothed the bones with flesh. Then we developed it into another creation. So blessed be Allah, God, the best of creators. Those who are from medical field, this is your ultrasound, this is your radiological results. And if you were born 1400 years ago, there was nothing like radiology. There was nothing like ultrasound. But this is a snapshot of that. Talking to people of deserts, no school, no colleges, no learning at the time, period of darkness, gripped in social, moral, all kinds of vices and backward people. They were the nomads to whom the God is addressing. The same God who addressed Moses, the same God who addressed Jesus, and all the way down to Muhammad, and is telling them all these scientific things, just one piece, okay? So reflect on that. Quran emphasizes, it doesn't lay out the very detailed descriptions of how you do this, only lay down the fundamentals. Reflection, result. Having said that, I want to go to the other source, which is the Hadith. And this, what piece that I want to read, is connected to the handout Annie just gave you guys. And if you want to go back to that, if I can borrow that, can I have the handout, please, that Annie gave it? Yeah. You have it? Yeah, please. Please, please, please. Sorry for that. Let me draw your attention to this verse here. It's at the bottom. You sure? How do you know I'm going to focus on that? Okay, the one that I'm choosing here is the very last one, the second last, 16, verse 16. And he has created horses and mules and donkeys that you may ride them, and as a source of beauty. And he will create what you do not know. Okay? 1400 years ago, these were the main transportation in Arabia and the rest of the part of the world. Okay? There's what Mercedes-Benz for you. Today's Mercedes-Benz. These, Quran says, will be replaced, will be abandoned at an age. And speaking of the age, Prophet Muhammad said, I call this age the age of Dajjal. Among the word Dajjal. Okay, it's an Arabic word. Dajjal means you confuse, you confound, you mix up. And I wanted to use an American expression. I'm going to abstain from it. But you mix the truth with untruth, confuse people, mislead people, misdirect people. This will be the age. That's the word Dajjal means. Create disorder everywhere. So this is a prophecy relative to this age. The donkey of Dajjal. What will be the donkey like that in this age? We know of the donkey, we have already seen in the past years. No more we're using those donkeys, but here's the description of the donkey. I've just picked up the main features, 10 main features of the hadith. That donkey will eat fire, not grass. You can travel inside the stomach of that donkey. We don't travel in the stomach of the real donkey. We ride the donkey, but this donkey is so strange that you travel inside the donkey. Lights will burn inside this donkey. Sea air will travel in the sea, you'll land in skies. Oh my Lord, a donkey will travel in the skies? Give me a break. Hand will touch the clouds. It'll go into the clouds. It'll travel knee deep on the sea and will not sink. It'll make an announcement of its departures. And it'll shorten the journey of the donkey. 1 month's journey will be shortened. This is in the hadith. 1 month's journey will be shortened to 1 day. 1 day's journey into 1 hour. And it'll carry huge cargoes from one end of the earth to the other for the allies, not for the poor people who are suffering, but for the allies. The distance between one ear of the donkey and the other ear of the donkey will be like 36 feet. Having said that, let me ask you a question. Do you see a donkey like that in today's age?
Yeah,
Huh?
yeah.
Perfect. So this was a prophetic description of today's mode of transportation that will replace the donkey, which the Quran says will be abandoned at the time. And as just as I read, and God is yet to create a very different form of transportation. That's the hint there. Now, as I said, Quran doesn't go into details. It leaves you enough to think. As the things unfold, then you piece them together. Okay, so if we know the donkey, the next question is, who owns the donkey? Who started the donkey? Muslim one? No. Saudi Arabia even today cannot produce one airplane. They buy all the planes from where? USA. Billions of dollars they pour in the United States to buy their donkeys from here. Not one single Muslim country produces its own airline or any transport. So whoever started the donkey is the owner and is the Dajjal. And what's the description of the Dajjal? I said, people who create disorder, war, and they lie, and they mix the truth with the lies, and lies with the truth. Any nation which takes that form of transportation involved in it, study them inside out. They never tell you the truth. They deviate you from the path of righteousness. They deviate you from God. That's the end of my presentation. We'll take questions now. Thank you very much for your patience. One more word of caution. I'm not compelling you to become Muslim. Okay? None of us here ever said you become Christian, you become Hindu. I'm with them. I'm not asking you to become Muslim. Please, it's a sin in my religion to say you become Muslim. Listen, you girl. I can't do that. It's wrong. It's a sin in my religion, okay? Thank you very much. Okay, let's take questions. And you want to go for Reverend Steve first?